But my beats, they are hard.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford and A.D. Drew here, and joined in this episode of the show, the MEAC Hall of Famer himself, class of 2019, former Florida A&M University Sports Information Director for over 30 years, Mr. Alvin Hollins. Drew, Alvin, good to have you back on the show. How you guys doing?
Well, I'm doing good. Good. Greetings from Tallahassee.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm almost relieved.
That
Almost relieved?
Almost relieved.
Almost. Yeah, because in 2 weeks, all this election crap will be over.
There you go.
One way or the other. Just remember, vote early, vote election day, just vote.
Okay, just as long as you didn't say vote often. Like somebody slipped up and said it. I think it was it Trump or something? I think it was Trump said vote often. Everybody like, yeah, you already know you're trying to rig everything, brother. Golly, man.
Yeah, definitely want to remind people.
Or put that stamp on it and make sure you sign everything on that bill in, because they will try to find a way to reject it.
Well, this is what speaking of that, I received my ballot in the mail, and I recall 4 years ago being able to fill it out and actually go to the polling location and drop it in. That is something you can still do, correct?
Depends on your state.
Okay, well, Florida, we did that 4 years ago, so I guess I have to get myself acclimated and figure out whether that's still an option. I hope it is, because or at least be able to quickly find my early voting location. I need to get it done. I don't want to go on a weekend. I did that 1 year during one of the Obama terms, and I was in line forever. I don't like standing in line, so I don't stand in line to get tickets to a game or a concert. So I sure as hell am not standing in line to vote. So
yeah,
right.
And then the lines, because you try to maintain your 6 feet, the lines look longer than they really are.
Oh, yeah.
So
exactly. I stood in line to get some toilet paper back in April, and I realized this is ridiculous. I don't, trying to get to the store at 8 o'clock in the morning before they open and watching how ridiculous people are. That was no fun.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that was after they put a limit on how much toilet tissue you could get. I pulled in there one day, and some guy was rolling out with a basket full of stuff, and these folks were looking at him like, "Man, how many people live in your house?"
Yeah, I'm stockpiling.
This is April. I said, yeah, but I guarantee you, they're talking about shortages. That turkey might be on the corner selling that stuff, selling it by the roll now, maybe by the sheet even. It's
all right, fellas, we get into TMI territory.
By the sheet. All right, so hey, we want to remind you, thanks for watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap on the Jericho Broadcast Networks. Want to remind you, if you are watching our show on Facebook or on YouTube, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the program or subscribe to the Jericho Broadcast Networks. And of course, if you're listening to us via our podcast, which appear on Spotify, Anchor, Google, Apple Podcasts, almost anywhere you can get podcasts, make sure to subscribe to the notifications so that you can always be informed as to or get notifications when our show is going live. And then one more thing we need you to do. Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the Jericho Broadcast Network's app. By simply searching My JBN or My BCSN is where you can find our app. And then when you go register for the app, make sure you tell the app, or there is an option, well, let them know that you found out about the app via the BCSN Sports Wrap. We are in a bit of a competition, I guess we are, with some of the other shows that are part of the Jericho Broadcast Networks. And I don't know what place we're in, Drew, but we're given the fact that this is the first time we're actually promoting this, and I know there are some other shows that are promoting as well. We're probably down at the bottom of the list. So just make sure to, tell the app, register, let them know that, hey, you found out and you're registering by way of the BCSN Sports Wrap. So again, that's the My JBN or My BCSN by going to your Google or Apple Play Store. All right, so this as we get into this particular episode, we're covering again the MEAC 50th anniversary. We spent the last couple of episodes talking about the greatest moments via the MEAC 50 list, and we started breaking down the all-time football list. Our ultimate goal will be to break down every category. We've gone through, last week we went through the running backs, receivers, and the offensive linemen. This episode, we're going to get into talking about the special teams guys, and then probably the largest category of any group, the quarterbacks. Very interesting. I think it'll be more debatable or there probably will be more debate and conjecture about who gets into the top 50 from out of this group than maybe any other group, because we'll see as we get into the conversation. But before we get going, guys, the MEAC made some news today. Actually, when we're recording this on a Thursday, kind of late in the week, and the MEAC not only had the basketball men and women's preseason media day, they released the schedules, released the all-conference teams, preseason players of the year, but the much anticipated and eagerly awaited MEAC football schedule was released. And so that's what kind of got us talking in advance. So I wanted to kind of throw this out to you guys, to Alvin and to you, Drew, as you look at the MEAC schedule. And just to set it up again, the MEAC split the 9 football playing teams into 2 divisions, a North and a South division this year. And for the first time in the history, we'll be playing a MEAC championship game on Saturday, April 17th. The season starts on Saturday, February 20th. So let me start. I'll go to you, Alvin, and just what are your thoughts just in general on a championship and all the years of the MEAC, them finally deciding to have a championship game. And one more thing, this will actually play into the winner getting a bid into the FCS playoffs.
Well, I mean, it's great to have an automatic bid to the playoffs, because, of course, the conference gave that up to basically throw its hat, I should say, into the Celebration Bowl. Championship, the only thing I know, the SWAC has had one ever since they went to the division setup that they had. Well, with the MEAC, our numbers have varied so much, and it's the irony is, for the most part, you've been able to get through the regular season, and you with tiebreakers and all that to determine a champion. The thing about a championship game, the only reason the MEAC didn't have one previously was because the NCAA required your champion to be available on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And since most of our seasons ended the week before Thanksgiving, that gave you no time to have a championship game unless you were going to kill all the buys or maybe reduce everybody's schedule to 10 games. So with this, unique situation that we're looking at in the spring, and this is probably going to be the only time it'll happen, in conference history because 3 of these schools will be leaving in July. So yeah, it's going to be, if things develop, it'll be an interesting thing to watch to see how it unfolds.
Drew, what are your, when you looked at the initial schedule, what are your thoughts initially about the schedule where we've got the 2 divisions, 6 teams, or actually I guess everybody's playing a 6-game schedule. You've got some unevenness. I'm sure you'll talk about that, but it's all over the course of an 8-week schedule. So there's 8 weeks of potential games before the actual MEAC championship.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, with 4 in the North, 5 in the South, like you said, you have odd teams. And it was interesting to see what schedule model that they were going to use. And we talked about it pre-show. Somewhere once upon a time, somebody predicted that the North teams would play each other twice, and then in the South, everybody would play each other once, with 2 teams with you having to play 2 teams twice.
You can pat yourself on the back for that. Go ahead. There we go.
But the first thing that I did when I still haven't broke it all the way down, but I did look at a couple of things. I did, obviously, as a Rattler, I looked to see who FAM was playing. Then I looked at it a little bit harder to see who FAM was playing twice.
Mm-hmm.
FAMU has Bethune twice and South Carolina State twice. So my next thought is, does that take my trip to Bryan's house in Orlando away, since essentially FAM and Bethune will be playing a home and home?
Oh yeah, I mean that game won't be in Orlando. It'll actually be home and home, and I don't know, Alvin, you may be able to speak.
Well, I don't know.
Oh really?
You know, since the schedule came out earlier today, I've actually heard that one of the games would be in Orlando, and one game would be, as they say, at a place to be named later. So I don't know if
does that mean double neutral site?
That would be the only way to be fair. Now the question, I in some conversations that I had today, I was also told that there will not be any fans, at least for the basketball. They're not going to allow us to have fans for the basketball game. And I don't know what the football situation would be. I think it would depend on, I guess, your states in terms of how many people they allow in gatherings.
You can get all 26,000 in Bragg, according to the Florida governor.
Right.
Governor DeSantis said any and everybody can go to a game. Go fill it up if you want to,
with no mask.
Yeah. No, I don't know if he said that.
Right.
So
yeah. So I mean, we're still kind of early in that process.
Sure.
But that was the only thing I was curious about. If we end up having to play Bethune twice, FAMU that is, would they be both games be on campus? Because I would imagine the rental for the Citrus Bowl, and you're not even sure you're gonna halfway fill it up with all of the viruses and everything else. Would it make more sense to just go home and home? But I don't know what the thinking is at this point.
And when you say home and home, you have the thing about, one, FAMU is in the midst of doing some construction, renovations to Bragg Stadium. So I would think, I don't know this to be true, but I would think that would take Bragg out of play for home games, which then leaves, I look, we've talked about this before. It leaves only 2 options, in my opinion, in Tallahassee, which is there's the Capitol Stadium, and then Doak Campbell, in my opinion. And who knows? I think the latter would be great, but I think that's less likely to happen. But who knows? We could be surprised. And Bethune plays games at Daytona Memorial Stadium. So I don't know if they did a second neutral, where might it be? I mean, this is all conjecture, all speculation. Where do you think it could be?
Well, I don't know about the new. See, the thing. One of the things when we're talking about the spring, you're trying to replace the games that were lost in the fall, and when you're seeing the SEC and some of these teams playing now, and they're ducking the bug like nobody's business, I said, dang, I just wonder, can we? Well, I guess in terms of the lost revenue. Mm-hmm. My thing is it worth renting, the Citrus Bowl or whatever the
Camping World officially. Camping World Stadium.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talking about a neutral site. I mean, where could you play, and not incur a rental fee? Because really, how much money, and that was always my question about the whole spring concept. How much money could you hope to make, and would you come anywhere close to even half of what you lost from the fall? Because when you think about it, with the virus, let's say we decide to go ahead and play it, at some, I don't even know if we would have had full houses, even if people were cleared, because people are still leery of, catching this stuff. And, every time you see a game or something where there are a bunch of folks, with no mask, and then you got the next couple of weeks, you got people, having, like University of Florida, they go to Texas A&M, with all negative, and they come back 29 guys on the team and a football coach, all, in quarantine now. So they've already canceled the game or postponed one. So I don't know. To me, there's just a lot of variables in this thing, and it'll be interesting to see if they're able to pull off a spring schedule, to be honest with you, because we don't know where we're going to be with this virus by Christmas or shortly thereafter.
My conjecture on that is kind of like what Alvin said. It's going to depend on where we are with the virus and whether we are able to have fans in the stands and or a vaccine. Full disclosure, I lived in Tuskegee, Alabama for over 15 years. So those of us who live or are from Tuskegee, we will not be at the front of the line for any vaccine. Now, moving on, when you talk, if there are no fans, you might as well play a home and home, like Alvin said, so that you don't incur the rental fees, So, but FAMU may not have a home due to construction. So if there's a neutral site and a home game, it's probably going to be Daytona and then Orlando, based upon just some of the logistics of it. If they're in the midst of construction at Bragg Stadium. Now,
but the Capital Stadium would be an option for FAMU, the artificial turf. I mean, that's where most of the major high school games here in the city are played. I mean,
correct.
It's just not Bragg, but three home games. So it's not like you're going to have a full home schedule anyway. In fact, that's all we were slated to have in 2020 was 3 home games. So
you still got them.
Right.
Now, when you look at some of the other larger stadiums in the state of Florida, you got the Super Bowl in Tampa in February. So obviously that may be something that that could be considered. I don't think you're going to go to Miami because you're coming back to Miami in the fall to open up against Jackson State. So I don't think they want to overkill the Miami area. Somewhere they have not been in a long time is Jacksonville.
Jacksonville,
So
yeah.
that may be a good second neutral site or alternative for the game, because it technically, if you play the one game in Bethune, it would be FAMU's home game, and FAMU could move their home game to Jacksonville and
Matter of fact,
get increased attendance. And well, I'm gonna let you go in just a second. And there's only one other large stadium in the state, which is in Gainesville at the University of Florida. That seats close to 90,000, if I do remember correctly. But FAMU does not have a tradition in Gainesville itself, in the Gainesville and Ocala area. So now I yield to you, Alvin.
Well, I think Jacksonville might be a good site to play both games. You know, one game would be Bethune would be the home team. Next time FAMU, I mean, because you're looking at, it's a 3-hour drive, or less for, well, I know it'd be about a 2.5-hour drive for us in Tallahassee, and
it's hours
maybe almost that much or a little less Daytona. See, so and so if you end up in a position where you want to be able to sell tickets, you know, that might be the ideal thing. You play an afternoon game, and it's the spring, so you're not worrying about people passing out from heat stroke and stuff like that. So you could play, 12 noon, 1 o'clock. People could drive in and drive back and be home, maybe not necessarily before dark, but be home before too late on Saturday, as far as your fans. That might be.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Alvin.
No, that was it.
Well, I was going to say, one of the challenges when you look at the schedule, and we're just talking about the state of Florida, but you've also got to start to think about what are the, and I'm thinking as you guys were talking, I was trying to think about what I've seen thus far from college football games. I'm trying to think what I've seen in Virginia, where Norfolk State plays. What have I seen in North Carolina for Central and A&T? Morgan's up in Baltimore, Howard's in DC. You've got all of these states up and down, South Carolina. So I think we've seen fans in most of those stadiums, in most of those areas, maybe not in the Maryland area, but that's going to be a major thing come the spring. And like you said, obviously there are challenges. We can't assume that this thing will all be clear. And again, I maintain that if you're planning on having a spring schedule, you have to be willing to basically assume or think of the assumption that there may be a week where you get pushed back because of maybe some COVID alarms. I'm not going to go so far and call them outbreaks, but you may have some COVID related issues in the spring. And so I think every one of these schools, and the MEAC included, if you're moving forward with this spring thought, I got to believe you're taking into consideration some of the political, maybe even the public relations backlash that you're going to get from people. And I think also politically, some of this is going to play out after November 3rd too. Depending upon who becomes our president, I think how we feel about this thing may shape what happens in the spring, in my opinion, because one president or one party is very much pro open this thing up, and another one seems to be operating under a little more caution. So we got to see what happens. Drew, any other thoughts regarding the schedule or just in general as you scan through it before we kind of move forward?
If I am North Carolina Central, and I believe is South Carolina State,
yes,
who has to play A&T twice.
So North Carolina Central plays A&T twice, and Bethune-Cookman plays
Bethune. If I'm those two teams, I'm 38 hot.
Why?
Well, unfortunately, in this
Somebody's got
setup,
I know.
somebody's got to play.
And somebody had to get the short end of the stick. And if I draw the short end of the stick, I'm gonna be 38 hot.
Wait a minute. What's the short end of the stick? What? Explain that.
Having to play them twice.
Playing A&T twice. You know, you're playing the two-time defending conference champion, and what, 3 of the last 4 of the last 5, whatever it is.
Yeah, but handicap it. Who do you think is the toughest team going into the spring? Because I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know if it's A&T. I mean, I think you got to think. In my personal opinion, I believe South Carolina State and FAMU might be the 2 toughest teams.
And that's what I was gonna say. Based on the schedule, you have to put South Carolina State as the 2 favorites in the South. And the irony is they play each other twice, which means knowing luck, they'll probably split.
Right.
You know, so which is going to really be interesting to see how those tiebreakers are going to work if that plays out exactly, you know, like we just proposed.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Those tiebreakers are going to really be crucial in the South because in the North everybody plays each other twice.
It's a double round robin.
Right.
Yeah, and just a bold prediction: the MEAC North winner will make it to the playoffs, because I think the team, whoever comes out of the South and survives the South, that dog schedule in the South will be too beat up at the end of the year in the short season.
I think the North favorites are probably going to be Norfolk State and Morgan State, in my opinion.
I'm rolling with. I was going to say Morgan. I'm rolling with Morgan. Right. Earlier prediction is Morgan.
Oh, I would go Norfolk State. If you put a gun to my head right now, I would vote Norfolk State over Morgan. But I think those are the 2.
Yeah.
Well, Norfolk is way overdue. So, yeah, you probably put the pressure on them to start with out of the North, you know, because Howard's got a new coach. Delaware State's in the 3rd year with their coach. Morgan, I think this guy's in his 2nd year, I believe. That's the reason people look at the North. That's the way they look at the North, and they just, you know, they think, you know, that anybody from the South is going to walk over them. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case.
One other thing, looking at the schedule, and I find it interesting. I don't know if this is coincidence or plan. The 2 weekends where football and basketball overlap, and when I say overlap, yes, we know it will overlap during the tournament, but just with the regular season schedule, there's only one time where a team is home both in football and men's and women's basketball on the same weekend, and that's Saturday, February 27th with North Carolina State. They'll have Bethune at home in football, and the men and women will have South Carolina State at home in basketball. Also, I found it interesting that no one, if you're traveling to the football game, you can't stay with your team and watch the basketball game because nobody is playing that there was no syncing of the schedules where the same football and basketball team were going to a particular school on the same weekend.
We talked a little bit off air about scheduling and what kind of pressure that's going to put on staffs. One of the things that the MEAC was unable to do that the SWAC was able to do was the SWAC, basically, when their schedule came out, they were able to pretty much create a bye-week, off-week scenario so that nobody had to play any games the Saturday or weekend of the basketball tournament. Because of the schedule, and I would presume probably because of the automatic bid to get into the FCS, which forced the MEAC to sort of move up their plans a week, the MEAC MEAC basketball tournament, which is March 8th through the 13th, you actually have 3 football games going on Saturday, March 13th. You have Bethune-Cookman at North Carolina Central, South Carolina State at FAMU, Norfolk State at Morgan. So that weekend, which would be the championship weekend for the men and women, you obviously, you know, won't have undivided, or you will have divided attention on the football and basketball. But bigger picture there, Alvin, the staffing. How do you imagine the staffing, or, you know, I know Drew's talked about it before. He's been in the mix in athletic departments, but you've been there. What's that going to be like for the athletic department, the SIDs, everybody who's involved? Give us an idea of what that spring is going to be like for these.
Well,
Alvin, before you get into that, Alvin, tell everybody how many people it takes from the sports information point to actually do a football and a basketball game as you give your answer to Brian's question. How many stat people, spotters, scorekeepers, et cetera, that you are responsible for as you give your answer?
Well, in football, I mean, to a certain extent, we work together with the game operations person. So PA, public address announcer, his or her spotter. Then you're worrying about, you know, the main press area, making sure people are accommodated, whether it's media, scouts, that type of thing. And then, of course, the statistics. You know, you usually have someone working the computer, at least 1 or 2 spotters would be ideal to catch everything, someone to record what's being called out in case the computer goes down or whatever. So you're looking at least as far as the actual statistics, you're looking at probably needing 4 to 5 people just for that part. And that's not counting anything else. I mean, you know, you're obviously going to need some personnel to patrol or police the press box to make sure, the media gets what they need in terms of questions and answered and that type of thing. And then, of course, post-game press conferences, coordinating that. And now the NCAA has a thing they call it's a meeting they have 2 hours before the game, where they meet with the SID and the game officials, and they all coordinate their operations. So now that's football. Basketball, you're still looking at about the same number of people to do statistics, but you're also responsible, again, for PA announcer, clock operator, and it's usually 3 clock operators because you got the shot clock, the game clock, and the scoreboard. Then you also have your official scorer, the guy that wears the striped shirt, the one that keeps the scorebook, keeps the fouls and the timeouts and all of that, So, you're responsible pretty much for that. Now, some schools, like I say, have game operations, but generally the SID, the first one there, last one to leave. So they generally in charge of coordinating that. That includes even dealing with the limited media. You don't usually get as much media for basketball as you do for football. Even if we're playing Bethune and Tallahassee, you still don't, because Tallahassee is literally a small market. No matter what they say about Milwaukee and some of those other places in the pros, Tallahassee is a small market. One newspaper that's not even printed in Tallahassee, and 2 TV stations, and 1 radio station that's sports related anyway. So, but still, you're responsible for, game operations, notes, statistics, pretty much the whole 9. And you're going to need a good staff, anywhere from 5 to 8 people to really work your basketball, and at least that many or more to work your football. Now, what AD's saying too. Now that's in a normal situation where you just got the basketball game or you just have the football. Now, if you now in case of I think it's A&T where they're gonna be bumping heads, with those two major events. Basketball, you're gonna have to juggle those start times. That's the only way you get around it to a degree and have it on the same day. We had a situation in 2008. You ain't gonna believe this one. 2008, Joe Taylor's first year. We had just hired a women's basketball coach. She scheduled a home game on the day we were supposed to play Hampton in football, and she wanted to play it in the afternoon. Athletic directors, sweating me from September. I said, well, look, the only way that's going to happen is you're going to have to change the times. See, the Hampton game was supposed to be like 4 o'clock. So I said, look, we move the Hampton game either to noon or 1, and we move the women's game to at least 7:30. That gives us some leeway. Now, we made that agreement in September. How did we know that college game day was going to show up that same day, on campus? Yeah. So, so you got, Fowler and, Coach Corso and all these guys on campus. So, it worked out great for the university. That's the day they bring in the students for recruiting. So, you got all that going on in front of the library, the band out there. I mean, it was the madhouse to us pulling it off, but it was great for the university and everything else. So, but there's so much that you have to try to handle. Now, I think in the spring, like I said, the other variables are going to be, we haven't seen the volleyball schedule yet. We don't know. That's usually Friday, Sunday. So that might not be a big issue for game day, but then you also have baseball and softball, which start in February. So, that's probably going to be, once those schedules are finalized, I think athletics, they're going to have some high level meetings, with the conference office on how to juggle some dates, flipping weekend series and that type of thing, because boy, I mean, it can be a lot. Now, baseball is not as intense or softball, but still, the statistics are important, as well as making sure, you got an announcer, somebody to run the scoreboard, that type of thing. So, and, some coaches are a little bit more high maintenance than others, so they want things a certain way. So you roll all of that stuff into that. That's going to be a very interesting, make for a very interesting spring. That's for sure. So,
Alvin, and I'm for to pile on right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. We still got tennis. We still got track,
golf.
We still got golf. Have I left anything out?
Well, you have bowling too, because bowling championships are the week or 2 weeks after the conference basketball tournament. So you'll be in the midst of bowling too as well. So, basically all of your sports will be competing. And this year is going to be interesting because you throw in volleyball and football. So all of that, from February all the way until April, that's going to be the most intense situation that I can imagine, because think about football. Even if you're on the road, you have to have somebody with the team, because if you're doing radio, if the games are and conference, I'm assuming that they'll still have some kind of streaming deal with ESPN. So you have to provide, service information to the broadcast crew, and both teams have radio and all that. See, football sucks up all the air in the room in a way none of the other sports do, because very few broadcast their basketball games. So some people don't even travel with an SID, or if they do, it's just one to cover both the men and women's games, you know. But in this case, when you have football in play, you know, some people basketball may not have anybody with them. So it's, you know, traveling because they may have a home football game back where they are. So that's going to put even more pressure on the host SID to make sure things are covered. But I mean, we're used to that to a certain extent because, you know, we all have to, you know, I mean, you'd be surprised how many of the PWIs that play us in sports like baseball, softball, tennis, you know, and they're saying, hey, can you send us the information after the game? And of course, as we talked about in one of our earlier shows, you know, the advent of live statistics has been a godsend for fans and for the SIDs, because now they can be at one event and they can track basketball. So they can make sure they update their Twitter and Facebook and all of that in a reasonable time so that nobody really knows, you know, how punch drunk they are, you know. So you know,
there's gonna be a lot of comp time come May for some SIDs.
Well, you know, well, not really, because and I say that because in May you got your conference championships in track, baseball, and softball. As a matter of fact, baseball and softball are a week apart. And if the softball is usually the second week of May. If they win, they go to NCAA regionals the following week. So you don't get, so I mean, if you're a FAMU or Bethune in particular in softball, you may not get any downtime. And here's another thing we need to consider too, and this is something I was talking to some folks. Let's just say a football team wins the conference championship, goes to the playoffs, and makes a run to the championship game. Now they're only going to have 16 instead of 24 like they do in the fall. But that's 4 games you'd at least have to play. So now you're talking about 6 conference games plus your championship, maybe 3 to 4 playoff games. You're talking about 10 or 11 games, and you won't be done until probably near the end of May. Then you got about 2 months, you know, you're talking about comp time. You got about 2 months off. You and the players in football have about 2 months off, you know, to get your act together, because you're going to have the regular season 21 starting either, you know, beginning at end of August or start of September. So you could have your football team potentially playing as many as 20 games in a calendar year. Crazy, you know. So
yeah,
this would be the year one of our teams actually makes that run to the playoffs, and they'll be like, man,
they're gonna pull you out of retirement, brother.
Well, we definitely had to see which it'll be interesting, kind of trying to handicap which teams have those kind of problems. I guess what they say, more success, more problems, for athletic departments, right?
Well, winning the Commissioner's Cup this year it's going to be tough on a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, look. I hope it happens, and you know, political stuff aside, because we know that people have feelings about whether they should be playing, whether they should be attempting to play. One of the things you may not even have to worry about is fans. You may not even have to worry about fans in some of these scenarios, except for maybe football or some of your outdoor sports. So we got some time. That's one of those conversations, I think, over the next couple of months that'll be interesting to have with some athletic department staff people, is to get behind the scenes and see how they are planning. And that's what you got to do. You got to be able to plan, and I'm sure you got to be able to plan an A scenario, B scenarios, and then what happens when A and B fall apart. So I'm sure that'll all be part of the conversations that go forward. All right, gentlemen, let's do this. Let's take a break. When we come back out of the break, we're going to get into talking about our second part of the all-time football team candidates from the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference over the past 50 years. We're going to talk about the special teams players, punters, place kickers, returners, and then we get into the granddaddy of the list, and that's the quarterbacks. We'll be back right after these words. You're watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap with Bryan and A.D. We'll be back right after these words.
Have you had your Earth Blend coffee today? At Earth Blend Coffee, we take pride in offering you the very best of beans across the world, blended and roasted to perfection, giving you superior quality and satisfying and flavorful taste. Experience the world in one cup with Earth Blend Coffee.
It's never too early to plant the seed, to share the tradition, and instill a sense of pride in your HBCU with your little ones. HBCU Pride and Joy Children's Boutique helps you share your school spirit with a wide selection of adorable kids apparel and accessories officially licensed from your favorite HBCU. Visit hbcupridejoy.com and follow us on all social media at HBCU Pride Joy on Facebook and Twitter.
Support the Black College Sports Network so we can continue to provide you coverage. Go to myjbn.com/support and be a part of the Black College Sports Network.
They can follow their dreams.
Welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford and A.D. Drew here, joined by MEAC Hall of Famer Alvin Hollins. And want to remind you to make sure you're following the BCSN on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook at MyBCSN1. The number 1 is where you can find us. And also see if you can find the BCSN Sports Wrap Show on Instagram, not Instagram, but on Facebook as well. And I always want to remind you, if you're following us and watching us on YouTube or on Facebook, make sure to like and subscribe and make sure to turn on the notifications so that you can be notified. But more importantly than all of that, go to your Google or Apple Play Store, search for the Jericho Broadcast Networks app by searching MyJBN or MyBCSN. And when you do so, register to sign up to be a part of the Jericho Broadcast Network so you can be up on many of the shows. We talk other things other than sports on the Jericho Broadcast Networks. And so when you go register for the app, tell the app or check I guess it's a drop-down menu, and just say you heard about the app from the BCSN Sports Wrap Show. And we're having a little contest amongst all the shows that are part of the network. And so we would like to, our goal is to not finish last. I can't predict first or second or even third, but we just don't want to finish last. That would be a bad look for us, as we are one of the shows that's been around the longest on the network. And for us to finish last would be pretty doggone bad, right, Drew?
Ditto.
All right, here we go. Getting into the MEAC all-time football candidates list. Again, there are 149 players that are a part of this list over the past 50 years. This MEACsports.com is where you can go and look on I believe you go to the sports section. Let's see, you go to MEAC. Let me see, where is it at? When you go to the MEACsports.com site, across the top header, go to the MEAC, and then right there you see MEAC 50th anniversary. Not only will you see some of the all-time candidates, and I know they just recently released volleyball and cross country as well, and they'll be doing other sports. You can also find record books and things of that nature. A nice job done by the MEAC overall. So I want to make sure to shout them out and give them props for what they've tried to put together. But what makes up this team of the 149 players, we talked about the wide receivers. There were 11 guys that made up this list. We talked about the 19 running backs, and we talked about the 20 offensive linemen in our last episode. So if you didn't see that, please make sure to check that episode out. let's get into special teams. There are only actually 9 special teams guys that are part of this list. You've got 4 punters, 4 place kickers, and 1 return man. So I guess one of the big challenges in doing this, Alvin and Drew, is the hunt for information as it relates to the place kickers and the punters.
Just in general.
Yeah, that's in general. And it's like I know how we can. Okay, so I'm just looking at the list that we aggregated. Among the 4 place kickers, we've got 3 Florida A&M Rattlers, James Vertuno, Juan Toro, Juan Vasquez. And then you've also got Malcolm Montgomery of South Carolina State. Now, all of these guys were multiple first-team All-MEAC guys. Vertuno and Montgomery were 3-time All-MEAC guys. For place kickers, we can kind of determine success based on field goals made, total points, things of that nature. For punters, my God, it is much harder for punters, where when you look at the group of punters, we've got Charles Poplis from Delaware State, Al Holland from North Carolina A&T State, and then we've got 2 Florida A&M Rattlers, Vince Coleman, the Vince Coleman, who also moonlighted and played.
St. Louis Cardinals.
Yep, St. Louis Cardinals.
And baseball Cardinals.
Right, the baseball Cardinals. And then most recently, a young man who's actually still in school, Chris Fadul of Florida A&M. And so, Drew, what strikes you as the hardest thing when you look at trying to measure how many place kickers, how many punters? I mean, are we talking just 1? Are we thinking 2? How do you handicap, or how do you even evaluate place kickers and punters?
It's really hard to handicap them when you can't get stats pre-2000. So 3 of the 4 guys you named as place kickers, Vertuno, Toro, and Montgomery. Yeah, I remember Vertuno, not necessarily Toro, and don't know too much about Montgomery on the surface, outside of doing some research, but you need numbers for a place kicker. It's kind of easy to quantify: field goal percentage, PAT percentage. Those are the 2 things that you need to look for. But when you talk about football, how many times do our coaches in black college football have the high school mentality when they should kick the ball, but they're going to go for it on 4th down from the 30-yard line instead of kicking the 47-yard field goal?
Because they don't have a guy who can kick a 47-yard field goal, maybe.
I mean, and that's the case a lot of times. So when you have somebody who could kick it from, we're just going to say 50, who could kick it from 50 with a highly successful rate, and from 50, if you're hitting 50% from 50 yards, you're doing good. So, that comparatively speaking, but so that's what gets it tough. Punt stats could be misleading because obviously when you're on your own 30-yard line, you need to boom the ball 50, 55 yards. But when you're on positive and you're on positive territory and you kick it from the opponent's 40, so you can't let it go because you're only going to net 20 yards if the ball goes into the end zone. So now you've got to punt to the corner, as they say. And one of the best that we have is a current Rattler at Chris Fadul and deading that ball inside the 20. Really for him, he gets that ball dead inside the 5 so many times, it's almost sickening. It's got to be sickening for the opposing for the opposing coach. You know, they tell you don't field the ball inside the 10, but if I'm the punt returner for one of these other MEAC teams, you probably almost do better with Chris Faduma punting and just trying to grab it and get as many yards as you can, because he's going to ping you deep and allow that defense to play and make you go 95 yards multiple times. So that's the other thing that's hard to determine with punters, but the NCAA does not have that stat that I could get in professional football saying how many times did they punt the ball inside the 20.
Alvin, the one good thing, and Drew, this is the one good thing about having Alvin here. He has seen all of these guys with the exception of Al Holland in 73 and probably Malcolm Montgomery. Montgomery was at South Carolina State from 76 to 79. So unless Alvin, unless you caught him that first year in 79.
Right. We did not play South Carolina State 79. So
right. So you've seen everyone else. What is your take on how you evaluate this crop of punters and then the place kickers? And I did find some stats actually for the place kickers, Drew, but I'll drop those after Alvin talks a little bit.
Well, I mean, having seen most of the guys, and it's going to be a little bit prejudicial on my part because it seems like the majority of the people named, with a few exceptions, were FAMU people. Purdue, for example, he's a two-time one AA All-America. He led the nation in punting. He led it in 2018. He averaged 48 yards a kick, and he averaged 46 in 2019. So he was in the top 2 or 3 nationally and made All-American again. That's one thing about this particular list, and one person that I wish they had listed, but I guess he didn't make it because, the reason he didn't make it was kind of an issue that Wesley Taylor, 2005, actually led the nation in punting at 45.8, but he didn't make first team All MEAC. I don't understand that. To this day, we still can't figure it out. And a lot of All-American teams are, especially for FCS, they basically look at the first team All-Conference selections. So here's a guy leading the nation in punting, and he wasn't first team All-Conference. So, and he was also the team place kicker. If you recall, I believe it was 2008 when we played. Was it 2008 when we played Bethune, and we fell behind 17 points, and we came back to win that game in overtime? He kicked a 46-yarder with about 4 minutes left to tie the game, the fourth overtime, and kicked the field goal to win it in the extra. So he was also an outstanding place kicker. But some of that stuff gotten lost in the translation simply because he didn't make first team All Conference. So I think this list is a little bit skewed, but so if I had to pick, if I had to handicap it, it would probably be Fadul, followed by, Wesley Taylor for sure. And, as far as the place kickers, for my money, would have to be the number one guy would have to be Juan Toro.
Yeah.
And because Toro, he made quite a few pressure kicks. In fact, I think if I recall looking at FAMU statistics, he's the all-time leading scorer. I think he scored more points than anybody, including the running backs and all of that, because of the field goals. Of course, he benefited from being there during the Billy Joe era when those guys the rack boys were racking up, touchdowns. So he got a chance to kick a lot of extra points. But, he also made a number of critical field goals, like at Southern in, I think it was 98. he kicked a field goal with less than 10 seconds to go for FAMU to get away with a 2-point win. And I think Juan Vasquez did the same thing 2 years later. Had those wild shootouts at Southern, 50-48, 50-49, that kind of stuff, where the defense sold popcorn during the games. I can tell you that because it was just flat out amazing, But Toro, I think Vasquez, now Populus was one of those dual threat guys. He punted and kicked, so he'd probably have to be right there in the mix. And one last thing about the kicker, Al Holland, A&T. He pitched in the major leagues for a number of years.
I thought that name sounded familiar.
He pitched for the Phillies and the Dodgers, I believe, for a number of years. So, because he was a baseball player too, so he went on his claim to fame went on to be baseball, which is ironic because when you look at Vince Coleman, who was a first-team All-Conference twice, he was a baseball player too, and he went on to the major leagues. I think he finished with something like 890 stolen bases in the majors. So that's the thing about college athletes. You do have these multiple sport performers, and I think one of the reasons you don't have more, defined kick returners and as such is because most of these guys were wide receivers. Like for example, Jerome Mathis from Hampton. He ran a 4.140 at the NFL Combine.
Say that again.
Yeah, he ran a 4.140 at the NFL Combine. Yeah, he was a speedster, and he was a kickoff and punt returner. I think but like I said, when you look at the conference record books, there are no statistics for special teams because there was nothing for field goal kickers or punters. So I think so it really comes down to having people who saw them play to be able to say for sure, out of that group anyway, who should be on the list. Now, I don't know if you want to go into the return people since I mentioned Mathis, but I think we were talking off air about Leroy Vane. I think everybody remembers the dynamic 2 years he had in 2008 and 2009. He still holds a number of NCAA records I think he still holds a record for most combined kick returns for touchdowns in a career, which is 8. And he did that in 2 years. And 5 touchdowns, I think he ran back 1 year. And of course, he was one of the few performers to actually have over 1,000 yards in kickoff returns and punt returns. And again, he only played 2 years. So, he had a fantastic short career, and he went on to briefly with the 49ers, I think. So.
Yeah, you mentioned him, Leroy Vane, who was a defensive back, by the way.
Right, he was a starting corner, yeah.
Yeah, so his 2 years as an All-American or really an All-MEAC, definitely in 08, 09, and I would presume probably a special teams All-American as well. He did have 8 – he still is the FAMU record holder. And you mentioned national. I don't know if he's the national record holder, but he had 8 punt return touchdowns in those 2 seasons. He had 5 of them in the 2009 season, and he holds a couple of interesting records in that 09 season for 5 touchdowns, 569 total return yards, and a 19.6 return average, which are still records at FAMU. And I would imagine probably strong records that still might even be nationally.
Well, he's actually number one
for a single season.
I mean, as far as single season, he's right there in the mix. And I think for career, career combined yards, something like that, because it combined kickoffs and punts. You know, looking at the numbers this morning, I think he was actually number one in combined yards because, he only scored, he scored 8 touchdowns. The guy averaged 19 yards a punt return. So that means you were getting great field position, and he was dang near going the distance every time he touched the ball. So he was able to chew up big chunks of yardage, you know, and, he had a phenomenal career. And, Joe Taylor came in. Those are Joe Taylor's first 2 years, 08 and 09. And he came in and brought a new emphasis to special teams, because now folks have to remember Leroy Vane was on the team before Joe Taylor got there. It's just that he was a reserve DB. We weren't really focusing much on kick returns, which, when you think about what he did, but Taylor brought a particular focus to special teams.
Mm-hmm.
His first 30 minutes of practice every day was special teams. So they really capitalized on Van without question.
Going back for a second over the place kickers, and I guess that is, the same. I hate to do this, but in one breath, where I'm applauding the MEAC for what they've done with the record books, we almost have to say what happened to, and you brought this up, where are the special teams records? I think there needs to be some concerted effort to add the special teams records that a lot of schools are keeping. They do keep, because I know I've seen them from Florida A&M's book. I've seen them in South Carolina State's record book. So they are available. It's just that the MEAC needs to bring them in, under their umbrella, in my opinion, and start putting this stuff in the record book. But you mentioned Juan Toro, who I would have to, I think it'd be a close call for me between Toro and Vertuno if I only had to place one place kicker. But the numbers on Juan Toro, you mentioned he actually total points in his career, 290 total points.
Right.
Most PATs in his career, 155. He had in one season, the 1998 season, he was 94.7% field goal percentage, 18 of 19. And in PAT, over his career, he had an 83.3, I wrote this down, 83.36 career mark. He was 45 of 54 in his career. He was a 2-time All-American, 2-time All-MEAC guy. Definitely benefited from being a part of the Billy Joe era. And then you had the Juan Vasquez era, but before that you had the Jimmy Vertuno era, he was a 3-time All-American, or a 3-time All-MEAC, and was an All-American in '88. He still has certain records that he led FAMU in scoring 3 of his 4 seasons that he was the place kicker.
Right. Well, that's primarily because offensively, he pretty much was our offense. I mean, as much talent as we had the Terry Mickens and some of the others, skill position players, but we didn't score. Well, I mean, obviously Billy Joe set a standard that it was hard to beat. It's been hard to beat since, but we didn't score. We didn't score with the same amount, or at least as much as we did with Billy Joe, but he was very accurate, no question about it. 3-time first team all conference. So that shows you just how good he was.
Mm-hmm. So I gotta, it's a tough call here. If we only had 3 to 4 spots, I think you gotta consider Van into one of those spots as a special teams returner. Now, I don't know if Van falls, I don't know what his defensive back statistics were. I think he was probably more dynamic in the special teams category than on the defense.
Oh yeah.
You know, I don't know how many interceptions.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, I mean, because I mean, well, I don't. Well, you know, you think about. Well, once we get to defensive backs, maybe the next show we'll be talking about Rasheen Mathis from Bethune, who had 14 picks in 1 year, which is still the NCAA single season record for FCS. 14 interceptions. So, he. So I think with Leroy Vane, it's definitely going to be as a return specialist.
And then I think your tough choices are going to be, you know, do you go with a Chris Fadul who's still kicking, but his numbers are strong? How do you measure Fadul versus Poplis? Now, like I said, I wish we could, and that's maybe something as we do this later when we actually put together a final thing. We've got to get the stats on Chris Poplis, who served. The fact that he was a 3-time All-MEAC tells you something right there in 91, 92, and 3. Malcolm Montgomery was a 3-time All-MEAC guy as a place kicker and punter, and Jimmy Vertuno was a 3-time All-MEAC guy. But then, of course, you look at Juan Toro and say Juan Toro is probably your career points leader in the conference, I would presume.
Right. And probably field goals and extra points too. But then again, you know, he benefits from the Gulf Coast era. So that's why, you know, as for example, like as AD was saying about punting, you know, do we have the statistics? And we have been keeping those because the computer statistics does chart how many kicks down inside the 20, how many touchbacks. You know, this is for kickoff folks as well as punts. In fact, Fadul actually became our kickoff guy as well at certain points of the season because of how strong his leg is. So, you know, it'll be interesting. Now he'll be a junior this year, whenever that junior year is. So,
I thought the 2021 was his last year. Fadul.
Well, I'm sure if he, based on his last 2 years, I'm sure he wanted to try his hand as a free agent. I'm sure he probably could get a few teams to give him a shot because he's got great hang time and the averages, you know, and downing those, as you say, downing those kicks, coffin corner. You know, he's as good as anybody I've seen in a while. So, you know, I think he certainly, you know, he's certainly's got the film and everything else to be able to walk into somebody's camp, you know, and help them out if need be.
Yeah.
You know? So, but we'll see.
Drew, let me come to you. Drew, who are your top 3 or 4 guys out of this special teams group?
I just lost my page. Give me a second. I got to go with Fadul as my punter. And as far as the kicker, Toro, Vertuna, Vasquez. I mean, the golden foot era of FAMU place kicking, but I'm gonna go with the one who started it off with Vertuno.
Well, one thing we need to mention here too. I know we had Vince Coleman listed as a punter, but he was also a place kicker. He was, matter of fact, as a true freshman in 1978, he became the team's punter and place kicker halfway through that championship year. So he kicked field goals and, you know, in some key games during that stretch run that they made toward the national championship. So, you know, and if you see pictures of Coach Hubbard being carried off the field, you see a guy wearing number 27 right there in the foreground. That's your true freshman, Vince Coleman. So, you know,
Okay.
of course, we didn't realize how fast he was until we put him on the baseball field. So, you know, he was an outstanding athlete too. His aspiration was to join his cousin Greg and be the kicking Colemans of the NFL. So, but with his speed, you know, teams weren't hearing that, so he ended up going to baseball.
All right, and Greg actually didn't make this list, so I don't know. And
Well, we were not in the conference until 1980, and Greg was in the NFL by then. He was firmly, as they say, firmly ensconced in the NFL by 1980, because I think his last year was 75. His last year was 75, so we were still D2 then.
All right. So, yeah, it'll be interesting when you guys go out to MEACsports.com, and then when you're filling out this special teams, it'll be interesting. Do you include, obviously you're going to have at least one place kicker, at least one punter. Do you go with 3 to 4 guys? I think that'll be the debate.
One and one.
Well, but what about the returner, though? You got to include the returner, though. You wouldn't include Leroy Vane on the all-time 50 team?
Okay, I get you.
Yeah, well, he should be. Well, what's going to end up happening with a ballot like that, that's wide-ranging, what you're going to end up with, depending on who the voters are, they're going to just tabulate the votes and see who, as far as offense and defense, special team, who gets the most votes. Now, I mean, if they had kind of separated, things a little bit, where you had a defensive ballot, an offensive ballot, and then a special teams ballot, and included some numbers and a little bit more information, like whether they made All-American, did they go to the professional ranks? See, all that stuff's important, because you talk about 50 years, there's very few people who know, what these guys did. I mean, you and I will look and see Harry Carson, or we know him from, but other people, it would be nice to have some numbers. But he's in the Conference Hall of Fame. See, the Hall of Fame kind of solidifies it for a lot of people, in lieu of statistics, But I think for us in this exercise, it really helps to be able to have numbers to talk about, and because when we get to the quarterbacks, we'll have their numbers, for sure, and that's going to be a tough call to pick 3 guys out of that group.
Right. Yeah. But the hard part with the MEAC Hall of Fame is, one, it's a small class that goes in every year, and there are guys who have gone in, and there are guys who have better statistics than the people who are in. And I'm not gonna get into calling out anybody or what. It's just something I've seen in the process of doing just from the offensive side of the ball. So,
Well, I can speak to that to a certain extent. It's the folks who select. It's not the selection, but the nominate. Each school has to nominate one person per year, which is bear. When you think about different sports, I mean, you got people, like you said, people left on the cutting room floor. If each school were to sit down and rank their top 25 or 30 greatest players that aren't in the hall, and you had to pull only one every year, I mean, that sounds like what they do in the NFL almost, man. Hey, we're going to put one guy in. What? I'm only going to put one. Or baseball. Baseball, actually, sometimes the percentage of votes, that's different than, the process the MEAC has. But see, because when you think about it, when the MEAC Hall of Fame started, they were doing inductions every 5 years. They weren't doing it annually like they are now. Okay. So that might be part of it too. But but I think really the SIDs should be the ones doing the nomination, and they should have larger classes, like you say, because they only put 5 or 6 in, which may be good, but I think you're leaving a lot of people out. So,
Right.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KeversVoice.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MYMAJESTEAS.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
Follow the Black College Sports Network on social media at MyBCSN1, the number 1, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at MyBCSN1. All right, well, let's transition over to this large group of quarterbacks that we have, and we've got 30 guys that make up this group. And I think what I text you guys, I thought what the interesting direction we could go with this conversation is we could talk about it from a per school basis, even talk about it from a individual career to individual season perspective, career versus seasons, and then also kind of talk about a top 10. Because I do think when you talk about the quarterback position, I mean, now there are, by my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 different groups that I came up with out of the 149 players. And so if you just go off average per group, you're probably talking minimum 5 guys from out of that position group. But there are going to be some groups, and special teams had 9. You're not going to put 4 or 5 special teams guys. You may only have 3. So those extra 2 or 3 spots are going to go to where? Probably quarterback, maybe running back. So that's why I kind of said, think about a top 10 here. But let me just throw out a few interesting stats about this group of 30. I did some deep diving here on this list of guys. So in terms of schools, we have Howard University with 7 quarterbacks, FAMU with 6, Bethune-Cookman with 4, North Carolina A&T State with 4, Delaware State with 3, Morgan State and South Carolina State with 2, North Carolina Central 1, Norfolk State 1. Noticeably missing none from Hampton. None from Hampton are in this list. Now, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was about to say, you look at Hampton, look at Norfolk. See, they didn't come into the league till 96 or 90. I think Hampton came in 96. Norfolk came in 97. So, they didn't have the longevity of those other schools as far as history, I should say. So that's probably why their numbers are lower. And they were, and of course Hampton, with their, we talked about their running backs. They were more of a run-oriented team. Anyway, that kind of gives you a clue. You look at the teams that have the most quarterbacks, they're the ones that really put more emphasis on the passing game,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a good point. Hampton definitely has more running backs. They probably got, I think we went through that list. They got about four or five guys, and A&T has like 5 or 6. I think they had 6 running backs, I think, when we went through that list. And South Carolina State, of course, there's another group with a large number of running backs and very few quarterbacks here.
Right.
Of the 30 players, only 5 of the guys on this list never were named an offensive player of the year. Only 5. So that's 25 of the 30 were actually offensive players of the year in the MEAC. And 3 of the 25 won the award 2 times. Alan Suber, Greg Mcgee, and Connell Maynard.
Right.
Those guys were the only guys to win. There is no 3-time or 4-time offensive player of the year from out of the quarterback class. So when I totaled it up, that you end up with 28 years of a quarterback winning the offensive player of the year in the conference. So I mean that, and probably, like I said, you do that in comparison to running backs, and I don't even recall when we did wide receivers if we had a wide receiver win offensive player of the year, because the one who never did was Jacquay Nunnally. He was the most prolific wide receiver. That's
because his quarterback. That's because his quarterback was getting all the votes for offensive player of the year. So
exactly.
He was just the wingman. Okay, man, I'll catch your passes. You get the hardware, baby. Don't worry.
Yeah. His 3 quarterbacks, his 3 quarterbacks won the offensive players of the year. Two quarterbacks, only 2 were 3-time first team all MEAC quarterbacks. That was Ellsworth Turner of North Carolina A&T from 75, 76, and 77. And then Alan Suber from 2001, 2, and 3. Superman, as they called him back in the early part of the millennium. He was a 3-time first team all MEAC quarterback, offensive player of the year. So Drew, let's do this. Let's start the conversation off by going by the schools, maybe just sort of the top 4 schools that we mentioned here. And if you had to, let's start with Howard. Howard has 7 guys, and they range from Michael Banks in 1974 all the way to Kayla Newton in 2018. How would you handicap or rank the Howard quarterback class?
Well, I've got to take out some of the older guys. No offense to the older guys, because I don't have any numbers on them. And, I'm a numbers man. So unless you got some numbers that you're going to kick to me, I've got to throw them out. Of course, we know Jay Walker was a legend for Howard, played backup quarterback, I believe, for the Patriots, if I remember correctly, for a while in the NFL. But outside of knowing that he was a stud quarterback during the time when we were in school, Bryan, and made it to the league, I can't tell you too much about some of the older quarterbacks.
Well, let me tell you. Let me add. Okay, so let me tell you about Walker. So now, Alvin, you can add on to this. For Jay Walker, he was a 2-time All MEAC, I believe, in 92 and 93. By what I found out here, because I think, he was a 2-time first team All MEAC. Okay,
right. Yeah.
The 93 season is the season that Walker probably had his best year. That team, he was an All-American. That Howard team actually won the MEAC and
playoffs, I think.
Went to the playoffs, and they were the co-HBCU national champions in 93. Behind, led by Jay Walker. So that probably would be Walker, the superlatives as it relates to Walker.
All right. I am going to eliminate Kayla Newton just for the simple fact that usually when you see quarterbacks or somebody with 2-year careers in the conference, they're at the end of their 2 years, the junior and their senior season. Kayla Newton came his freshman and sophomore year. Yeah, he had the big statement victory against UNLV as a true freshman. Had a great freshman year. Was a little bit. What was that?
Rookie of the year.
Yes. And unfortunately, when you have such a great freshman season, there's nowhere else for you to go but down. And it was due to no fault of Kayla Newton. It was just situation changed at Howard, which ultimately led to Kayla Newton transferring out. Change of head coach, and then a few other things, and he wound up transferring out halfway during his junior year.
Your junior year, yeah.
Which everybody was expecting him to have a rebound year compared to his sophomore year, but he did not.
The sophomore year, he was the offensive player of the year his sophomore year.
Yes.
Okay.
So, they were expecting that, but they got off to such a terrible start under, I believe, Ron Prince was the head coach.
He was
the
one.
Prince.
Yeah,
the Prince experience, and there was, but it was not Purple Rain. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, he was one of the people who actually quit the team. See, that's what he did. I mean, he said he was transferring, or he was the first.
Yeah.
And that eventually led to Prince's demise. Thank goodness, really, because it's a shame. That team, had some championship potential. As far as the returning talent.
Talent was ridiculous on that team. That talented team in every skill position.
But if just to give you my one from Howard, I have to go with Greg Mcgee, who has more total yards than anybody that we have stats for on this list, with over 10,000 total yards, 7,500, just over 7,500 passing yards, just over 2,500 rushing yards.
How many yards you have down for Ted White? Because I thought he was listed as the all-time passer.
Ted White is the all-time passing yardage leader, 9,808.
Right.
That's just passing.
Yes.
Number one.
But I agree on Mcgee, because he was a total. As far as total offense, he was very mobile. In fact, he ended up going to Canada. I don't know how he did up there, but he was an outstanding young man. I mean, I met him a couple of times at the kickoff. This outstanding guy in the community with community service. He was a great guy. Unfortunately for him, the teams he played on were pretty much horrible, because he went through that situation where I think the coach left, under kind of mysterious circumstances. Gary Harrell or Gary Harrell, who was a good guy himself, but he got caught up in something and he had to leave the program, and that sort of left Mcgee in the out of the mix, so to speak.
One last stat I want to throw out: in his 43 career games that he played with Howard, 26 rushing touchdowns, 49 passing touchdowns, which equals 75. So basically, he was good for almost 2 touchdowns per game.
Yeah.
Correctly.
And what's interesting, AD, and you got me thinking about Mcgee as in my top 10. I may have to shoot him up my list. Mcgee versus Ted White. That's interesting, seeing when you think about the total yardage of a guy who was a runner, and all of these Howard quarterbacks were offensive players of the year. That's the one thing that I also find pretty interesting about this. All 7 of these guys were offensive player of the year, and Mcgee is the only one to do it 2 times. He was the 2-time offensive player of the year. So,
well, he was a dynamic guy. And of course, like I said, he played on some teams that turned out to be, they more or less were behind. So he was almost like Dak Prescott. And, you know, before the injury, he was basically having to do more than human things to be able to bring the teams back or keep them in contention, you know. And because of that, you know, like I said, his scrambling ability to run, to be able to throw on the run, and then great downfield arm. I mean, he was such a threat on multiple levels. You know, he certainly, you know, I think that's why he was Player of the Year 2 years in a row on, you know, he was like Andre Dawson, you were MVP on a last place team, because he was just, he was that kind of guy. He could win a game. He could cost you a game if you know, if you didn't contain him. So
for disclosure, Andre Dawson is a rapper also.
Now, Alvin, I would argue though, if I were debating McGee versus Ted White, the argument for Ted White would be Ted White had the great season of 1996 in which he helped lead Howard to a Black College National Championship in 96. His 98 season only got interrupted from probably the great awards and all the other stuff by some guy from FAMU who came in out of nowhere named Pat Bonner. And, you know, if it wasn't for Pat, I mean, Ted White had a great 1998 season, but Pat Bonner had a better 1998 season.
Greater.
Yeah.
Greater. Yeah. Matter of fact, I didn't kind of lost track of my media guide because I wanted to pull the numbers from, you know, they actually had a head-to-head competition, head-to-head showdown in Jacksonville, and they both threw for, well, I know Bonner threw for over 500. It was a 61-49 was the final. FAMU won, but Ted White threw for almost 500 himself. So it was
I've got
pretty
that
much.
I've got that right here for you. It's funny you mentioned that, Alvin. You're talking about October 17th, 1998. Which still to this
almost
day,
to the day of recording this.
All right, almost to the day. Which that game featured the two quarterbacks who to this day still own the record for the most passing touchdowns in a single game. Ted White had 8, Pat Bonner had 7, and then the record for single game passing yards, Ted White with 561 is still the most in a single.
Okay, yeah, that's right. It was 561, yeah.
And
Bonner's
502 is actually number 4 on the list.
Is this the conference?
Yeah, that's from the conference record books. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that was some kind of game, tell you the truth. And of course, we feel good about it in orange and green because we came out on top. But you know, but it was, I mean, it was just one of those games that, you know, it was, you knew it was going to be something special just because these two guys were at the top of their game. You know, matter of fact, both were seniors because Bonner actually transferred in with 1 year to play from Temple.
Right.
Because so they were both guys with senior experience, and that particular year, that 98 season was pretty spectacular for both, and especially for Bonner.
Does that game, when you think about greatest quarterback performances by two quarterbacks in a game, does that rank as is that top of the list of the games you've seen or you can recall?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I've seen, you know, you've seen a few. I've seen a few others, but nothing along those lines. I mean, you're talking about over 1,000 yards passing and 15 touchdowns. So I mean, it was, you know, it was up and down the field. And
now, I have to ask this, Alvin. Was the quarterbacks that good on that day, or were the defenses that bad on that particular day?
Well, I mean, you could ask that same question about those Southern games out in Baton Rouge, where we scored 50, Southern scored 49 or 48 or whatever. So, no, but at that time, I think the offenses were just ahead, and the skill. And the key thing, really, you know, as much as we focus on quarterbacks like Tom Brady and whoever, if you don't have the great receivers to make you look good, and you know, Bonner and Ted White, you know, had some outstanding pass catchers, but of course, FAMU had the rack boys. I mean, that year, you know, you had not only Nunnally, you had Canaan Lamb, and you know, they both finished the year with over 1,200 yards receiving each. You know, so I mean, it was just, I mean, they had just a phenomenal season. I mean, FAMU finished #1 in scoring. This is nationally now. Scoring, passing offense, and total offense. So, you know, it was a scary thing, you know, because if you recall that team, that was 98. Yeah, that team actually won 11 straight games at one point. They lost to Hampton by a touchdown in the season opener. You know, tied it up. Hampton drives the length of the field to score late to win 21-14. And FAMU wins 11 in a row, including a first-round win over Troy State in the playoffs. You know, and really should have come out of Western Illinois. We got jobbed on. They should have sent Western Illinois to Tallahassee because FAMU was 11-1. But you know, well, you know, we'll talk about that another time. But and FAMU actually led until the final 3 or 4 minutes, which became their MO a year later when they went back to the Midwest at Youngstown. You know, our mistakes burned us. I mean, that, you know, Billy Joe put together some teams that easily could have at least played for or won 2 or 3 national championships. That's just how close we were, just how good they were at that time, you know. But that 98 squad was phenomenal because Bonner wasn't the starter. He wasn't the opening day starter.
No.
You know, we had what? Yeah. So had, I think we had 3 quarterbacks, and Billy Joe said, I'm going to give everybody a start. So third game was Jackson State, and Bonner went 30 for 35, 384 and 4 touchdowns, and I think he completed like 14 in a row at one point. It was just ridiculous. And this is the week after the 87-12 nuclear bomb that we dropped on Norfolk State, you know. So it's just really weird. And he was like the mop-up guy in that game against Norfolk, and he was 12 for 13.
Mm-hmm.
So, you say, okay, let's give this guy a shot.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alvin. I'm sorry.
No. So, I mean, at that 98 season, you know, if I had to pick 3 quarterbacks, you know, it would have to be Ted White, Bonner, and I went with I went with even though he had better numbers, I went with Connell Maynor.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on. Before we go down that too far, let me just. I want to come back.
We're doing Howard right now, right?
Well, we can move from Howard to FAMU here in a second. I just wanted to point out one little thing here because I think it sounds like we have a consensus that the top 2 out of the Howard era would be Greg Mcgee, Ted White, and then Jay Walker would probably be third, I guess.
Third, right. Yeah.
Walker was the only one to win a conference championship. But for somehow, I guess because of the way it worked out, Ted White also in that 96 team won a Black College National Championship. I think there were a couple of different teams that won that. So Ted White's 96 team They were Black College National Champs, or they claimed they claimed one from somebody. You know how those go. And then Jay Walker's '93 team did as well. So that's Howard. All right, so jumping over to FAMU. FAMU has 6 quarterbacks, and they start with the Pat Bonner in '98. Or excuse me, actually they start with Oteeman Sampson in '97. Pat Bonner in '98, Jawan Sider in '99, Quinn Gray, who 2001 is a MEAC Hall of Famer, Curtis Pulley, 2-time first teamer, I believe. No, excuse me.
Right. Yeah, he should be. Yeah, 2-time first teamer. And I think he was.
Yeah,
his offensive player of the year.
Just one of those years.
One of those years. He was offensive player of the year in 2009.
Yeah, 08 and 09 were Pulley's 2 years, and then of course Ryan Stanley was a 2019 offensive player of the year. So
right,
how would you handicap, or how would you rank this group of FAMU quarterbacks? It's tough.
It's a mixed kind of situation because, Billy Joe was bringing in these hired guns for 1 or 2 years, and that's the crazy part. You look at Sampson. See, Sampson, 96, and now he played 2 years. He transferred from Albany State, and I think he finished second all time in passing over 6,800 yards. And I don't have his total offensive numbers, but he was a pretty fair runner. But then Bonner came in, like I said, in '98, and after 2 games, he took over as the starter. Include his 2 playoff games, he ended up throwing for over 4,200 yards and 42 touchdowns. That's in, and see, he didn't play the first game. He played the second game. So, it's 10 plus in 12 games. He threw for 4,200 yards and 42 touchdowns. It was like 3,500. It was like 3,500 yards and 30 some odd touchdowns in the regular season. See, the NCAA started right about this. Well, actually, they didn't. And the reason I mentioned the playoff, see, they didn't start NCAA right after Bonner and Nunnally left. Then they decided to start counting postseason stats in with the regular season. Most schools, like in the baseball, NFL, those are separate categories, postseason and regular season. But for some reason, they just start, because if that's the case, then Nunnally would have had probably another 30 or 40 catches, but that's.
It makes you wonder,
that's not
should they retroactively go back and add those in,
Well, they could. I mean, they get the game reports. They could do it, but, it's I'd hate to be the one doing it. I can tell you that, but, it'd be fun, but I don't,
Sounds
but
like
I
some
think
internship.
Yeah, well, I they'll pay me and let me and bring all my files to Tallahassee so I don't have to move up to Indianapolis. I'd be glad to do it for them.
You got some time on your hand, huh, Alvin?
As long as right. But I mean, out of the FAMU quarterbacks, I think looking at what they accomplished, you'd have to go. You have to go with Bonner for that one magical season that he had. And then really, now the thing about, even though Sider, was a quarterback that took the team to the national semifinals, he split time with Quinn Gray. See, Sider didn't become the starter until maybe by the Tennessee State game in Atlanta, somewhere like that. It was sometime in September. But even then, Quinn was still getting reps. And of course, he came on. Sider was a runner, so he got dinged quite a bit. And he got dinged up against Troy in that quarterfinal, and Quinn had to come in and lead us on a couple of drives. And then in the infamous Youngstown game, which no Rattler fan even wants to acknowledge even happened. But but in any case, you know, he won the Bill Buckner Award. That's all I can say, because that interception with FAMU up 24-13 with 8 minutes left, you know, was.
But you know what's funny, Alvin? That was sort of the introduction of Quinn Gray. But his next two seasons, were his better seasons. I mean, the team won the MEAC conference both seasons. In 2001, went to the playoffs. I mean, he ended his career on a higher note than really what most people might remember it for, if I'm saying that correctly.
Well, and then the thing is, matter of fact, he was selected to be part of the 2020 FAMU Sports Hall of Fame class. You know, which is, so that made 2 Hall of Fames in the same year, because he went into the MEAC Hall of Fame back in March. You know, so and you're right, actually. You know when you think, I was teasing him about it. I say, you know, actually the defense is the one that let you down. I said, heck, you go back and look at the statistics for that game against Youngstown. We had 12 sacks before that interception. We should have, you know, and they were down 2 scores. They had to score twice. So, you know, defensively, I think we just sort of, you know, we thought we had them. All we needed was a field goal or something. But, you know, and if you go back and look at our history in the playoffs, with the exception of a couple games, it's almost the same pattern. We had the lead, we had the advantage, we needed to close. We just didn't close them out, you know, and that's the only thing, you know. Otherwise, you know, we should have been. You know, we could have gone a lot farther, but that's one of the reasons, too, the competitiveness of FAMU. Now, think about it. 97, you had Sampson. 98, you had Bonner. 99, you had Sider and Quinn Gray. 3 different quarterbacks, and you go deeper into the playoffs every year. So it's a tribute, really, to the 80-year-old man, Billy Joe. You know, what he was able to do with the material that he had, was to get position us to be a playoff team. And those 3 years, 97, 98, 99, FAMU went in as an at-large team. They didn't win the conference either 3 of those years. And they were actually seeded higher than the conference champion.
Yeah, they were co-champs to the 98 season, I think, as we talked about. They were co-champs in 98.
Yeah, because we lost just the 1 game to Hampton, and then they lost somewhere else down the line. But that was the years they were going to the Heritage Bowl, I think so. Yeah, 98.
All right.
Go ahead.
I would say, I just got one question on something Alvin just said. How do you go to the Conference Hall of Fame before you're in your school's Hall of Fame?
It's just the timing of it. See, our Hall of Fame, had we not had COVID, the FAMU Hall of Fame would have been held in September. See, the MEAC Hall of Fame is in March during the basketball tournament. It was just the timing of it. It wasn't necessarily, because actually, you're going in the same year, 20 years from now, nobody is going to ask you who you go in first. They say, hey, just like Billy Joe in 2007, he went into the College Football Hall of Fame. Now, the president at the time, Alvin, said, he asked the chairman of our Hall of Fame at the time, said, is Billy Joe in our Hall of Fame? I said, no. We need, Mr. Chairman, we need to do something about that. I think it was 07. So we had a special emergency meeting, and next thing we knew, Billy Joe was going in 07. So, yeah. So, because he'd already gone in the MEAC Hall of Fame, and it was just, I say, timing more than anything else.
All right, Drew, give me your top FAMU quarterbacks. Or how would you rank this? Give me even if you can give me top 3.
And I'm not gonna go deep into it. I'm gonna be honest with you. I know he's a statistical leader in all-time passing yards, and probably for a career, Ryan Stanley, but you have to discount Ryan Stanley because he ain't beat Bethune.
Yeah, in fact, yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it. Every Rattler has to discount Ryan Stanley because he did not beat Bethune. He has the best numbers for a career over anybody, but did not beat Bethune and did not get to the Celebration Bowl or the playoffs. So
Technically,
Celebration Bowl for him.
Technically, he didn't win the conference because had we beaten Bethune his senior year, we would have won it outright, and that was the only other loss FAMU had that year. So
we won it then too if we
junior year we would have won it.
Yeah,
last 2 years.
So I guess when you look at what he did in the lurch, it wasn't good, but so I mean, and also too, when you look at these quarterbacks, it's amazing to look at the numbers. You look at Bonithorn for 4,200, you look at Sampson for over 6,800 in 2 years, and at the same time, it took. Of course, now Quinn had to wait behind people before he could get on the field full time his last 2 years, and he threw for 73. And then Stanley ended up. See, Stanley was really outside of Tony Ezell is another guy that probably would have been on this list, except he had the unfortunate situation of running to Connell Maynor, and who beat him out for first team all conference and player of the year, I think in 90 and 91. Yeah. But there's only a handful of quarterbacks in FAMU history that started 3 or 4 years. Most of the guys are coming in their junior year, and that's when they're playing. Of course, Billy Joe was, he was bringing guys in, like I say, he'd get guys literally off the street, it seemed. And then the next thing you knew, they were All-Americans. That's just what kind of system, he had. And he was such a great coach. So, but sometimes the numbers in this case can probably be a little deceiving just because, you look at what these guys accomplish in a short time, playoffs and things like that. But FAMU was just blessed, to have had those guys during that Billy Joe era. And I think Stanley might have done pretty good during that time too, without the turnovers. That's the only thing. I mean, I think that's the only thing that really kind of, like you say, kind of tarnishes his legacy, especially in that last game of the year.
Yeah, and I remember Tony Ezell playing when I first got on the Hill. I thought that's what college football was gonna be like. Then we had a couple of dog years after Ezell left in the early '90s. While Ken Riley was on his way out the door before they hired Billy Joe. But if you have to give me anybody else off of this list, Brian, who wore the orange and green, I'm probably gonna go with O'Team.
So who's your top three again? Your top three out of the FAMU group?
I'm gonna be honest with you, Brian. I really could go two because everybody else is just right there together. It's really tough to separate those Billy Joe era quarterbacks. It's really tough. I think O'Team, in my opinion, may have been the best of that era of quarterbacks, but all the rest of them, to me, you really can't go wrong with anybody else in that Billy Joe era.
You can go wrong if you don't tell me a top three. Give me top three. Stop.
All right, I'll go with Bonner then. If you want my third one.
Okay, so rank them 1, 2, 3. Come
on. I go with Teeman, Bonner, then Ryan.
Then who?
Ryan Stanley.
Man, that's your
stat
top
accumulator.
Oh my God.
Okay. Well, I never did. I give my 3 or
I just know. Give me your 3, Alvin.
Well, I'd have to go with Bonner number 1.
I agree.
It's a toss up. Well, in this case, I'd have to go with Sampson, because I mean he had 2 strong years, especially 96 and 97, leading us to the playoffs. You know, won the conference in 96, got automatic bid, and then 97, we had a shootout with Georgia Southern. Actually, we buried ourselves in a big hole, you know, and had a tombstone over it. And somehow or another, we managed to shoot our way out of that bad boy, and we're within a touchdown of them, you know, with 8 minutes left. So that was our story in life. So I think he would be number 2, because he was a dual threat quarterback. You know, he could run and throw. And I think he had over 600 yards or something, 600 some yards, 500 some odd total yards in that game against Georgia Southern in the playoffs that we lost. And then, boy, after that, I don't know. I think I have to give Quinn Gray the number 3, because he had the yards. He waited his turn more than anything else. And even even though I think, like I say, I think sometimes, we can be cruel when we talk about that one play against Youngstown. I say we have to remember, he drove us. Well, it was Kenny Williams that drove us straight down the field. All he did was hand off to Kenny Williams. But against Troy, when Sider got hurt, he took over most of the fourth quarter. It was a 17-10 final. So, he took us down the field and led us to a clinching touchdown in that game. So he was I guess really a true sophomore then. So, because usually in Billy's situation, you don't get to play till you were juniors or whatever, but he was good enough. And then of course, now we have to remember too, even though, and it's amazing the fact that he didn't make first team all conference, or did he? I don't know. I don't think he was. Well, he was on the list, so he must have. But 2001
was the only year
2001
was first team all conference.
But he led us to back-to-back conference championships.
Yes.
And we got to remember too, he played in Jacksonville with the Jaguars. I mean, they had that three the hard way, 3 black quarterbacks, Gerard and I think Gerard was a starter, and I'm trying to think the guy that's tutoring Tom Brady down in Tampa now. He played at Marshall.
Oh,
black quarterback.
Leftwich,
yeah. See, those were the 3 quarterbacks in Jacksonville, and he played quite a bit. He came off the bench, started a couple of games for Jacksonville, and then I think he ended up Kansas City and Indianapolis, got a couple cups of coffee there. But he because he was a prototypical quarterback, 6'3", 235, 40, had the great arm, touch, and everything else. So he just so I would have to put him in my top 3 along with Bonner and Sampson.
Yeah, I would I will go with the Bonner's 98 season as number 1. Just for, in terms of greatest individual seasons, it ranks right there as the top in not only in the history books, but just in terms of what FAMU did. The whole, like I said, 11-2 overall record, lost the first game to Hampton, who you end up split the conference championship with that year. And then you go 11 wins in a row and all that story. But then the old team in Sampson, the 96 season for Sampson, I know in 07, he won Offensive Player of the Year. The reason he didn't win it in 07, despite the fact that FAMU went unbeaten in the MEAC, finished 9-3 overall, as mentioned earlier, Ted White led Howard to a 6-1 record. Only loss was to FAMU. They were 10-2 overall and won the Black College National Championship. So, I mean, that's why Oteeman didn't win it in 96. And he won it in 97, although FAMU finished second in the conference to Hampton that year. That was 97. So he would be my number 2, and then Gray would be my 3. And you talked about stat accumulation. I mean, until Ryan Stanley, came along and had his 3 or 4 years as a starter, because there wasn't anyone else in the program really, or just how the nature of things were. Gray had all the passing records. He had the passing record for like 20 years. So even though Curtis Pulley came along and had a good couple of seasons, Gray was the one who, 2-time MEAC champ, offensive player of the year. So that's my 1, 2, 3.
This is the Dean of the College of HBCU Sports, Kenyatta Cavill of Dr. Cavill's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop. Come mix it up in the lab where the course lecture is in session every Tuesday from 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live, YouTube Spreaker, or the BCSN app, as we discuss all things about the HBCU sports culture, including exploring the week that was in the sporting HBCU diaspora, as well as the upcoming week of HBCU sports. With me, the Dean, the College of HBCU Sports, on Dr. Cavill's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop. Course lecture dismissed.
The Cuvée Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cuvée.
Support the Black College Sports Network so we can continue to provide you coverage. Go to myjbn.com/support and be a part of the Black College Sports Network. All right, let's move off of FAMU before they start to think this is a Homer show. Let's end this segment of the conversation in terms of individual teams. Let's quickly go into Bethune-Cookman's 4 and North Carolina A&T's 4. And I think it's real interesting. And I'll go to A&T first because they've got an interesting group of 4 guys. Lamar Raynard, Ellsworth Turner. Well, actually, I'll start from the oldest up. We've got Ellsworth Turner, 3-time first-team player from 75, 6, and 7. Then you had Alan Hooker, 85 and 86, first-team All-MEAC. You had Connell Maynor, 90 and 91. And then you had Lamar Raynard, who, I mean, he was only a first-team All-MEAC in 2017, but he was a 3-time conference champion.
All he do was win.
Black College National Champion, first 3 seasons, had a 26-0 starting record. That's the group of A&T quarterbacks. And I don't know. That's you talk about trying to, even though there's 4, I'm going, if I said to say, hey, give me your top 2, who do you narrow it? Who do you narrow down that top 2 with, AD?
If you go with name recognition, it's Connell Maynor and Lamar Raynor for people of my generation. Saw Connell Maynor play when I was in college. Saw Lamar Raynor play as a member of the media. So just those 2 right there. But I don't have any numbers in front of me about Ellsworth Turner. But the fact that he was 3-time first team All-MEAC and Offensive Player of the Year in one of those seasons should tell me something. I don't know what it's going to tell me, but it should tell me something. So that's kind of my take on it. without statistics on Turner.
I will say Turner's teams were the only ones that did not win a MEAC title. Hooker's team won a title in '86. Maynard's '91 team won, and then of course Rayner had 15, 17, and 18 teams that won the MEAC in those years. So just to give you that perspective, I guess. Alvin, what about you? You saw, with the exception of Hooker, with the exception of Turner, you saw the rest of these guys. How would you rank? What would your 1-2 be from A&T?
Well, I definitely would have to rank. Maynard number one out of that group. Because he won the conference championships and was Player of the Year both years for Bill Hayes. I saw Hooker. I was more impressed with Hooker than I was with Rayner. Rayner was on conference championship teams too, but I was more impressed with athleticism of Hooker. So those would be my top two out of the A&T group.
Maynard and Hooker, huh? Okay.
Right.
That's interesting. I would probably go, I'm with AD. I guess maybe I'm biased because of never having seen Hooker. And without I would just maybe, because of the fact that Connell Maynard was the Offensive Player of the Year 2 times. And, there's only, what did I say? There was only 3 guys in the history of the MEAC to ever win the Offensive Player of the Year twice. Much like Greg Mcgee for Howard, I got to think that means something for Maynard. And then Raynard, with just the wins, the win record might make Raynard one of the best in the history of the conference.
Well, and one more note on Maynard and Hooker. They're both MEAC Hall of Famers.
Oh, okay.
So that, that when you have to kind of split hairs, that makes a little difference, at least in terms of, how people view their careers. So.
Yeah, I gotta believe Raynard will eventually be one too. Yeah, no doubt. All right, so Bethune-Cookman's 4. Now they've got. I'm gonna go oldest to youngest. I don't know the exact year for Jermaine J.D. Hall, who's a Hall of Famer, by the way, but I gotta believe it's sometime in the first 25 years of the conference. Then you have Patel Troutman, who I believe was a 98 Rookie of the Year. He was before Alan Suber, who came in
right, yeah,
on 03. And as mentioned, Alan Suber is one of 2 players to win first team all MEAC from the quarterback position. Ellsworth Turner was the other. And he was a 2-time Offensive Player of the Year. And then they had how about Matt Johnson, a young man who, we talk about great seasons. His 2010 season, where he was a Offensive Player of the Year, an All-American. Looking at some old articles from his 09 season to his 2010 season, it was a dramatic improvement and led Bethune-Cookman to a Black College National Championship in that.
Oh, okay, that's okay.
Yeah, so and they won the MEAC that year. So Drew, who's your 1-2 punch for Bethune-Cookman? You're on mute.
Like I say, don't know too much about Jermaine Hall, J.D. Hall, but the fact that he's the only MEAC Hall of Famer in this group,
yeah,
I have to give him his props. Suber, I mean, the man had 79 touchdowns in 45 games for Bethune. Those stats say it all for me right there. You know, over 7,800 total yards. So that looks good. But that's my one and my two. But I have to throw a 2B in there. Matt Johnson, first team All MEAC in 2010. If I do the math, Bryan, isn't that the year that they started the streak?
Yes, it is. It would be the year.
Okay, that's why that's my 2B.
Well, Matt Johnson was the quarterback that FAMU, of course, now FAMU ended up losing that share of the championship because of some NCAA sanctions later. But, Bethune-Cookman had won 10 straight going into that Florida Classic, and FAMU knocked him out of the game, and they went on to win that game. So that spoiled their bid for a perfect season. So.
Yeah, that's right. Because Bethune was 10-0. They were. That's right.
It was 10-0.
10-0.
Yep.
And they
Yeah, because that was that coach they had, that firebrand coach they had. That was his first year, and he stunned South Carolina State on the road, and everybody was going, "Who are these guys?" They were basically flying under the radar for so long until they won that game against South Carolina State. So, they were headed, they'd become nationally ranked, and they were headed, they ended up going to the playoffs anyway, because but I think they ended up sharing the championship with South Carolina State and FAMU.
Yes.
So.
That's a good choice there, Drew. What about you, Alvin? You I don't know if you saw J.D. Hall, but from what you saw,
I did see J.D. Hall. Matter of fact, it was kind of he had a tragic end to his life. He died young. I think it was it was accidental death that he passed away. I don't even think he had made 30. But he was a dynamic. He was a dual threat quarterback as well. I think if I had to pick two, I would probably pick Suber and J.D. Hall.
All right.
Can I throw one more caveat about Matt Johnson?
Sure.
Bethune did win the Black College Championship in 2010. The 2010 season.
Yeah, I think.
Right.
They did.
Yes.
So moving on quickly, guys. The other part of the conversation had to do with career versus individual seasons, and when you look at these quarterbacks, for me personally, when I look at individual seasons, and you think about Bonner's '98 season, you also could include Matt Johnson's 2010 season. But I think some interesting guys, how about Chris Wally of Norfolk State in 2011? He was the Offensive Player of the Year, and he led that Norfolk State team to now at the time, they were 9-3 and claimed a share of the Black College National Championship. Now, later, those 9 wins had to be vacated. There's that, but that Norfolk State team won a MEAC championship that year in 2011. So that was one of those individual seasons of note. You also had in 1994, Marvin Marshall, South Carolina State Offensive Player of the Year. South Carolina State in 94 won a share of the HBCU National Championship that year in 1994. They were also MEAC champs that year. Were there any other individual seasons that when you look at this that you're like, man, that this season just really stands out as something, worth?
I've got one. What about 2016? Malcolm Bell, the only person to break up the A&T streak over the last 5 years.
That was his senior year too, because he had been there since 2013.
Yes. So let's throw him in the discussion for that. And I always like to say, you know, with the Celebration Bowl this year, will the MEAC have a representative this year, not from the state of North Carolina, not necessarily in the Celebration Bowl, but win the conference championship this year?
Well, that's true.
Statistically speaking, I got a name I'd like to ask you about, Alvin. Rashawn Matthews, who was at Delaware State from 96 to 2000. At the time that he graduated, he was number two on the career passing with 8,073 yards. But how do you evaluate his career amongst just what you've seen? Because when I look at the stat books, his name is there, but he leads in categories. If I'm gonna just quickly, if I go to what I saw earlier, I think some of the stats that he led the conference in had to do with like total pass attempts. You know, you tell me what's your thoughts on
well, I mean, those, you know, the teams he played on, you know, I think he was pretty much the one guy that had to bring them from behind, because anytime you're leading the conference in pass attempts, you know, unless you are a Bonner or Quinn Gray, where you got this prolific offense, usually you're coming from behind. And I think if I recall the Delaware State teams from those years, I don't know. I mean, this was late 90s. This was the late 90s. So they had some decent teams, but you know, I mean, they were, you know, behind Hampton, FAMU, A&T. So I think in many cases, you know, he probably rang up a lot of yardage simply because, you know, his teams were, you know, always kind of struggling coming from behind. Now he was a guy that had to be contended with. Now you throw for 8,000 yards in 4 years, that's nothing to sneeze at. But so I mean, if you know, I think when you just look at sheer numbers, you know, you certainly have to, you know, give him a look anyway, you know.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the records. Delaware, his best season was his senior year with Delaware State in 2000, where they finished tied for fourth with a 5-3 conference record and 7-4 overall. Every other year, Delaware State was overall under 500.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Basically he was, I guess you could almost say he was a man on the run. You know, they were behind. So that's why that's why he had so many passing attempts, because he was basically trying to play catch up, you know.
All right, gentlemen, so I'm a stat nerd, so I'm not going to run through any of those stats. We talked about a lot of stuff today. Let's wrap it up and kind of let's give now I asked you for a top 10, but if you want to just shorten it to a top 5, that's fine as well. Just overall. So overall, your top. Drew, do you have your list? Alvin, you have yours?
Quarterbacks, yeah, I have mine.
All right, so give me your. You have 10 or 5?
I think I have enough for 10.
All right, give me your top 10. However you want to. You want to do the drama and give us the drama and count it down from 10 to 1. That's cool, but however you want to do it.
Well, I didn't have it quite that way. Because initially I thought we was going to go top 3, but my top 10 would be, as they say in no specific order, Ted White, Jay Walker, Jawan Sider, Oteeman Sampson, Curtis Pulley, Greg Mcgee from Howard, Connell Maynor from A&T. Then, of course, Quinn Gray, Pat Bonner. How many is that? Is that 8?
That's 9.
That's 9. Okay. And then I'll have to go with Alan Hooker from A&T.
Wow. Okay. Interesting list.
Yeah.
Interesting list. That's why I said this will be an interesting pick. If you can only pick 10, when you submit your list, it'll be interesting to see who you come up with. All right, Drew, you are up. Take yourself off mute and let's hear your 10. In no specific order.
No specific order.
All right.
And I'm gonna give you the best that I can, but I'm definitely gonna go and I'm gonna go down by school, make it a little bit easier on me since I have my list. Definitely gonna go with Jermaine Hall by default because he is a MEAC Hall of Famer. So definitely going to throw him in there on that one. Connell Maynor. Well, let me stay with the Bethune people. Keeping up. Yeah, I can't talk anymore. Keep it up with Bethune. Also, got to go with 3 Bethune guys to start off with: Suber, Hall, and Johnson. Coming down to FAMU, you've got Quinn Gray, Oteeman, and Bonner. From Howard, I'm gonna go with Mcgee and Walker. A&T, definitely have to go with Connell Maynor and Lamar Rayner because he won. Not necessarily because of numbers, but because he won. And Malcolm Bell. Where am I at on my numbers, Brian?
Let me see. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 10. So you don't get
okay.
Bell.
That's it then. I'll stop there.
Interesting. You got it. That's interesting. All right. So I'll go down my 10. Number 10. This is a tough one for me because I could toss it up to a couple different guys. I went with number 10, Chris Wally from Norfolk State. Number 9, I went Marvin Marshall, South Carolina State. Number 8, originally I had him 8, but you guys make me want to move him up, and that's Greg Mcgee. Number 7, Connell Maynor. Number 6, Jay Walker. Number 5, Quinn Gray. Number 4, Alan Suber. Number 3, Ted White. Number 2, Pat Bonner. And number 1, Lamar Rayner. I just can't get over the fact that, Raynard's career might be the greatest career of any of the 30 quarterbacks, in my opinion. And outside of the great statistical season that Bonner had, and I think that's why I put Raynard above Bonner and even Ted White because of the accomplishment of Rayner's team. And his stats weren't like garbage. I mean, he had good stats.
Yeah, it's just people had other people had better stats.
Go ahead.
Well, one thing about Rayner, we have to remember who his wingman was, and that was Tariq Cohen. In fact, without Tariq, I don't think you know that much about Rayner, because I think they were teammates. And Tariq was the triple threat. You could go the distance from any point on the field. So I think that,
I'll counter that by saying the undefeated 2017 season was without Tariq Cohen.
Okay. Well,
and that is I think that'll be my plant my flag in the ground and say why I'm standing behind Lamar Rayner as number one.
and I don't know about number one, but that's why he's definitely high up on the list, is because of that. The only team in the MEAC to go undefeated and untied in a season.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the MEAC, right.
Right. In the MEAC, yeah.
In the MEAC, yeah, because FAMU did go undefeated in '77, but they weren't in the conference then. So technically, that doesn't count.
All right. Anyway, it'll be an interesting, as you can see from just the differences in our three lists. I'm sure a lot of people's list will be different, and so that's why how the quarterbacks become a part of the 50 greatest players, it'll be interesting to see. Because definitely, I mean, I think both of you guys made solid arguments for your guys, and so I know when we go a little further with this, it'll be a very tough decision for us.
And what's even more exciting about that, Brian?
What's that?
We got to flip to the other side of the ball on the next show.
Great transition. Next time when we get together to do this, we get strictly into the defensive side. We've got 16 defensive backs to pick from, 22 defensive linemen, and 19 linebackers that we have to look at. So there's some hell of a talented group of players on that side of the ball, and that'll be our next show when we get together with Alvin, and we'll kind of break down the defensive side. But you can go to MEACsports.com and take a look at the 50th anniversary team. You can even vote for your top 50 and submit it, and I think that will help be a part of what the MEAC chooses. They'll look at the votes and see how people vote in terms of naming the 50 greatest MEAC football players. And of course, we've all got our omissions and other things like that. But remember, it's all discussion, and I don't think there is a right or a wrong here because it'll be personal opinion, definitely.
And when you vote, people are gonna vote one or two ways, Brian.
Party line.
Yeah, they're gonna vote for. Yeah, they're gonna vote for the person who played at their school or at their favorite school.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna vote for that person who used to kill your school.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. I was thinking about that earlier when it comes down to quarterbacks. I can't imagine anyone from Howard not checking all 7 quarterbacks from Howard. It's like, hey, I went to Howard. Oh, hell, I'm marking all 7 of these guys. So, I mean, that's just, and like FAMU, I mean, anyone from FAMU, you're probably going to hit all 6 FAMU quarterbacks, and whoever else is in this thing, you might just go a full FAMU ballot. So, it really is. It's going to be
the straight FAMU ticket, like the straight Democratic ticket.
That's how this is going to go. It's not because, like Alvin said, there's no stats, so you don't have, unless you go and do the research, like what we've tried. Like what we've tried to do. You're not going to have this. You're not going to have that information, and a lot of it ain't out there. You got to really do some deep diving, like we've been doing, to go find this stuff.
Well, Google is not your friend when it comes to this.
Well, and that was one of the things I said about it when I first saw the list. Is I kind of disappointed in the sense that, we didn't provide a little bit more background. I mean, quite a few of these players were All-Americans. You know, a number of them, you know, went, you know, played professionally, you know, different sports. I mean, on different positions, played professionally, offensive line, wide receivers. When we get into the defensive side, you're definitely going to see, you know, guys who played in the league, including a guy who was the rookie of the year, I think a year ago. So, you know, so I'm just saying to not have included some of that information on this ballot, you know, because some people don't, you know, you're talking about Ellsworth Turner and folks like that. People might, I recognize the name, but I didn't see him play. So, you know, but how does that necessarily, should that necessarily disqualify him? So I think as good a job as the league did of putting this list together, you know, adding a little bit more, you know, sauce to the goose would have been nice.
Well said, Alvin. All right. So just a final reminder, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube and Facebook. You know, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you can find podcasts, just search BCSN Sports Wrap. That's where you'll find us. Make sure you're following us on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook at MyBCSN1, the number 1. And of course, the Jericho Broadcast Network's app, download it on the Google or Apple Play Store by searching MyJBN or MyBCSN. And when you register, make sure to say that or check the option that says you heard about this app from the BCSN Sports Wrap. We're trying to finish anywhere other than last. That's our goal. So as long as we don't finish last, we're good. All right, so that's going to do it for this show. We want to thank Alvin Hollins again. Alvin, appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the quarterback and special teams and just this whole MEAC 50 thing, which is really cool when you think about the history of this conference and what it's meant. So definitely appreciate you. And we got one more show to do on this football team list, and that's on the defensive side of the ball. Drew, you can find AD Drew at BCSN Drew on Twitter. That's where you can find him. And I am at DRB365 on Twitter. That's it. So, all right, gentlemen, appreciate your time. We're going to go.
All right.
We're going to go back in the lab and put this on wax so we can get it out to the people. For Alvin Hollins and AD Drew, I'm Brian Fulford. Thanks for watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap on the Jericho Broadcast Networks. Peace out.
Holla.
But yo, my beats, they are hard.